It's not in the face! Thank you.
Hello and welcome to Hey, Not the Face with your host, John Nash, and your producer, me, Steffi Haynes. And today is Hodgepodge Day, and we have a whole score of topics to talk about. But before we get into that, you probably are getting used to what I'm about to say, and that is our plea for you to subscribe. We have great bonus content. Often we have some exclusive stuff in there, and, you know, we could use the boost. So thank you very much in advance. And also, before we get into all that, let's check in with John and see how the hell he's been over the past few days.
I'm good, but I don't think we need to beg these people to subscribe. Listen, if you losers don't want to subscribe, that's your fault. You're to blame because you're going to miss out on the extra content, and we do share stuff that I don't think anybody else shares. So that's it. But we're not going to sit on our knees and beg you losers, you freeloaders that are coming in just to get the free shit.
I am sitting on the floor, though. So no, I'm just kidding. Okay. We might be providing exclusive content out there. And we hear you guys out there stealing our stuff. I just want to put that out there. We hear you. We see you. My eye's on you.
Oh, geez, were you doing the Robert De Niro?
I am. I was doing it. I was pointing at both of my eyes and then pointing out. Oh, man, you know me so well. All right, so let's dive right in here. First things first, who the heck is the Probellum crew? Because I saw a tweet from Kurt Emhoff that you liked and you shared. And it said that the Probellum crew, that he had heard that TKO was going to call up the Probellum crew and get them back in business. What does that mean? Who are they? Who were they? How are they involved in combat sports?
Well, the Probellum crew was the name of a brief boxing entity that existed, I think 2022. It lasted like 9 months. That's it. And what they were kind of notorious. They kind of had appeared, made a big splash, big announcement, and then burned out. And the reason they burned out because they were linked to Daniel Kinahan, the Irish gangster. And the way they were linked is Probellum was a new promotion for boxing. But people noticed that one is that their name they had signed all the MTK, which was the boxing promotion that basically Daniel Kinahan used to launder money. They had signed all their fighters from MTK. Well, okay, that's one thing. Maybe they went in and heisted them all, right? But then there was further links. Another link was that the name of MTK's MMA division a few years earlier was called Probellum. That MTK had copywritten the name Probellum and a logo that looked a lot like the logo that the Probellum boxing promotion was using. And then finally, a Pakistani official had posted on social media a message that he was happy to be working with Probellum to bring boxing into his territory. And then he had a bunch of photos of a bunch of officials from Probellum, supposedly, and one of them was Daniel Kinahan, one of the photos. So it kind of blew up and they disappeared. Now they claimed that they were not connected to Daniel Kinahan. He was worth MTK. They no longer had any relation to him, and that the guy mistakenly posted that photo. I'm not sure I 100% buy that defense. But the crew is interesting because the people that were involved with Probellum were pretty big names. Richard Schaefer was the head of it. People remember Richard Schaefer worked at Golden Boy, built them up, and then jumped ship to help with PBC. He also negotiated on behalf of John Jones as his advisor, his contract with Dana White. I don't know how much negotiating he actually did. I don't know if John Jones looked in the fact that those two are very close friends, but he was involved in that. Another figure in it is a guy named Harrison Whitman, who was a general counsel for Top Rank for 5 years. Was earmarked as a major player coming up. And then a bunch of people, a few names from old UFC days. Eric Winter, who used to run the Fight Pass for them. That executive, he was a member of Probellum. And an Anthony Petosa. I don't know, most people don't know, but he was I think he won an Emmy or something, but he was a head of production for UFC. Not head of production, but one of the guys in production for UFC and executive. So it would make sense in many ways because a lot of these guys have relationships with the UFC. Richard Schaefer is very close to Dana White. Eric Winter and Petosa, I understand, there was no bad blood when they left. They left under the Endeavor reorganization, but they still had, they're remembered fondly, and they still had connections. So them and Harrison Whitman as a guy that was earmarked as a major player. So it would make sense, except for the Daniel Kinahan connection. But apparently, there's nothing as bad PR anymore in today's world. So it does make some sense that these would be the guys that Dana White and Endeavor, TKO would be thinking about bringing in to help them with their boxing venture.
You're speaking about PR right there, and that's going to bring us right directly into our next topic. How important is social media to a promotion's success right now in this current day and age?
This one's a hard one for me because I am not good with social media. I mean, you probably can tell with the traffic I can generate, right? I am not a social media guy. I'm on it. I tweet. I use it, but I'm not the best. I have friends that are specialists in social media PR, and I've talked to them about stuff like this. And of course, because they're in it, they think it's the most important thing in the world. I would argue it's important in some ways for MMA combat sports because you are not going to get traditional coverage. It's not something to get traditional coverage. But when you look at social media, I think you got to go hand in hand with ideas like influencers, things like that, podcasts, influencers, other types of non-traditional media, because I don't think social media by itself you can really use it the way you could a few years ago, where you get things to go viral and get picked up and get attention. I think you have to go and use it with other people that have successfully figured out how to successfully use social media. I don't think you can just come in and use it traditionally. But is it important? Yes. I don't think it's as important like straight up, your account, but it's important that you can get other people to share it.
Let me ask you this. More than a decade ago, I would say it was closer to about 15 years ago, UFC started targeting people that were posting clips on YouTube, and they were hitting them with DMC violations. And these days, you can't even post a GIF half the time of UFC events without getting dinged for it, getting your account banned. Even on Twitter, Instagram, they target people. Do you think that has hurt other organizations too? Because the UFC will set the example, I guess, and they follow suit. Whatever UFC does contract-wise, this, that, the other, everything is always based on UFC. So I have noticed that PFL, Bellator, before they shut down, one is very, very, very picky about sharing content and having people share it on YouTube. So do you think that has caused a ripple effect that damaged the ability for other promotions too?
I have to put the caveat again. I am not an expert in social media, and this is something I do not know that well. My gut would tell me it kind of has, because MMA is built for viral moments, as Dana White says, the oh shit moments, right? Mm-hmm. And you can get a lot of shares, and the UFC is already the 800-pound gorilla. So I don't know what would be the concern of smaller promotions to get that out there. I don't think you're losing sales after the event. The event's live. People paid for it. It's very rare that people pay for it. There's a few stragglers, but it's probably worth sacrificing a handful of pay-per-view buys after the event if you're getting hundreds of thousands of views on social media. So, just gut. Again, I'm not an expert in this field at all. I'm not an expert in any field, tell you the truth, under my breath there. But in this field especially, I'm just not very well versed in the use of social media like some other people. But it does, just my gut instinct says, yeah, it seems to be you're cutting off your nose despite your face by tramping down on the shares of social media in this way. You would benefit from getting more activity and people maybe asking, where did this come from? How can I see this?
Yeah. What do you think?
I would say too, sorry to interrupt you.
Oh, that's okay.
The one part too is, I would say with social media, it's not just those shares, it's people who do share it. I think the big weakness of non-UFC is you're not getting the celebrity influencers sharing it like you do with UFC. And part of it is the advantage they have with Endeavor and Dana White's connections to all these guys. But we want to talk about the weakness of social media. Stronger shares would probably be the biggest thing that they could do.
Okay. What do you think of PFL's PR/social media arm?
Well, I guess, this goes hand in hand with this because I don't want to like rag on them, but you look at it, they do not seem to get much traffic. So whatever they're doing does not seem to be working, right? We do not see many impressions, much interaction with their accounts. That we same with a lot of the other, sites. I mean, Combate Global, which, Camel McLaren is out there talking about how it's just the biggest thing in the world before. And now they're on YouTube. They were getting, no interactions really with their social media accounts, Twitter and stuff. And on YouTube, I don't know, they turned off the live viewership, which is always a sign that you're probably not getting a lot of live viewers. And it didn't look like they're getting a lot of interactions on the chats and stuff for that. So I didn't see it trending on Twitter, Combate female today. So I don't know how big they're going to do. But I mean, you could talk about, I could rag on the PR department for PFL, and I would say that they on social media they don't seem to be doing that great a job, but neither do the other MMA companies. So I think it's harder. One thing I'll say, I think the PR part for PFL, one thing they're excellent, they seem to be, is doing the stuff we laugh at, and we know is kind of bogus, but it's the stuff like, planning stories and stuff that help raise money to make it look good in the business community that, they're getting money, they're going to guitar and going to get money. They have, look at the story that talks about how their valuation's gone up and how they're doing all these things. That part, we, again, MMA fans, people listening to this, we probably laugh at that because we know how misleading that is. But for the purpose of their company, trying to attract attention for people that are not as familiar with MMA, I would say they probably do an excellent job on that side.
Speaking of that, Don Davis did an interview with entrepreneur.com. And when I looked at it, you drew my attention to it. What you just said, we had talked about a few days ago. And when you sent me that article, it immediately, everything you said just flooded back into my brain. So now I want you to flood our listeners' brains with what you told me.
Well, I mean, the big part of that, the Don Davis thing is, again, he is communicating to the business world. You look at that article, and it was on entrepreneur.com. Right there should send you a message. Who is this meant for? Mm-hmm. This article is not meant for you, the casual fan. It's about how Don Davis walked away from his dreams and now is heading a $1 billion value professional fight league. I don't know if that number is true. I have my suspicions. Maybe, you looking at the revenue that I've seen, understand they had before, I very much doubt that they are an actual $1 billion company, but he's claiming that. But the whole message he gives in it, and this is kind of interesting too, because we were talking about on previous shows how Dana White is amazing in the attention market we have right now. Mm-hmm. That he's amazing at communicating and getting attention on him. And you can see Don Davis kind of tries to do that. But if you look at that article, and I recommend people read it, one thing you look at how badly he kind of communicates to the MMA fan, but how good he communicates to the business world. Because he goes through like numbers for the business world, like we have the quality of fighters that the UFC does. Well, if you're not familiar with MMA, you look at it and go, oh, this guy makes a very strong argument that they have the same quality of fighters. They're just waiting for the fans to catch up. They're meeting this underfed market that because the UFC doesn't produce enough events or doesn't have enough fighters. All these things that someone from the outside that might think, oh, this is going to be a successful business venture might buy into, but us as MMA fans, hardcore, know that the business doesn't quite work that way, that we do not look for second tier minor league replacements. And I don't really, there's no such thing as minor leagues in MMA, but I'm using it here because that's how the general fan base looks at it, the most fans. But there's no replaceable. We don't instantly go to another replacement. The fans have been tied to the UFC. They view it as where the best are, all that stuff. And so you can look at Dana White is very good when he talked about TKO, how he's going to do the best versus the best, a message that really could resonate with fans, casual fans or stronger fans, but that people that are going to actually watch it, where Don Davis is communicating to investors and potential sponsors and things like that. Now that might be important because he can raise more money, but nothing there tells me you can sell to the typical fan. And as an attention in the attention place market, trying to gather attention, this is not a communication that will drive fans towards the PFL. I also think it's interesting. I just want to note, he talks about we have, our fighters at the same level as UFC, and really only can name is like Francis Ngannou and Chris Cyborg as the number one women fighter of all time, and Francis Ngannou's number one heavyweight. And then Dakota Ducheva as a rising star, which is true. But I want to know it. My understanding, as we talked about before, I don't know how much longer Francis Ngannou has in PFL. So if their big sales pitches are quality of fighters, and Francis Ngannou is one of their big sales pitches, if it's true that his contract has a termination date, and that termination date's the end of this month, they better get on that, because this is one of their major selling points. And if they're looking for a big TV deal after the UFC maybe leaves ESPN, you're going to need Francis Ngannou to get that sale. So that just shows you, in some ways, the message they're communicating to the CEOs and the corporate world. Those are things that we as fans that know the sport would see through, but they don't.
All right, I've got something for you on all of that you just said. Do you think part of the problem with these promoters, and I'm speaking directly to the head promoter, the ones that are the front-facing people like your Dana White, your Don Davis, your Chatri, people like that, do you think part of the problem, and especially Campbell McLaren, I have to put his name in there first and foremost because he is the guiltiest party of this. But do you think they try too hard to be like Dana White when they are also having to be the ones at the negotiating table? Whereas with UFC, you've got Dana White playing your Queen Elizabeth character, and you've got Hunter Campbell and Mark Shapiro and everybody else in the back doing the deals, the big stuff. And Dana White is your front-facing guy who only has to worry about being, the circus ringleader guy.
Yeah, I mean, in some ways, it's that the problem is they're trying to actually run the company and be the representation, the figurehead. Now, Dana White, I'm not going to say he doesn't run the company. He is a figurehead, but he has some say in the company. Sure, but you're right. Sure. He doesn't, the negotiations when they did the TV deals, he might show up, but the majority of negotiations were done with the Fertittas and other people involved in the company before he showed up to shake hands and so they can get a photo with this famous celebrity they built. The other thing they miss, a lot of these guys, is Dana White, this is years to make him into a celebrity. He can act that way because he has this image that's been built over years. You can't behave that way immediately when people don't view you as the same figure, you don't have the myth behind you of Dana White. You don't have the power behind you. None of that works. And also just not natural. Dana's fairly natural behavior. Yeah. And you see these other guys, they feel so artificial and orchestrated or bitter. I mean, a good example of someone that's natural at this, and he is not successful anymore, but he was before, is Lou DiBella. If you watch him on Ariel Helwani, he is combative and he's got a chip on his shoulder, and he's and he can talk like a tough guy, but it's natural with him. He's kind of charismatic when he does it. And other guys try to ape that, and this is not you are not good at this. So yes, I 100% agree. It also doesn't work when you try to be a tough guy. When Dana White can do that and boast and kind of yell back at you because he is, he can then brag, if this was I just did $1 billion in business. What did you do? You can't do that when we're looking at your YouTube numbers and we're like, you know what? You just got 500 people watching live.
Yeah. And the other thing too is that Dana, despite being 55 years old, is in phenomenal shape. I mean, when you're close to being a billionaire, you can pay for that. But the point is, he's in great shape. He presents as, young middle age. He dresses young. He's everything all these young guys want to be when they get to his point in life and age. And then you have Don Davis and Campbell McLaren and Chatri out here in jeans and a suit jacket and a button down, and they're much older and they don't know how to talk. They don't know the lingo, and they're not presenting as this I'm not going to call him a beefcake because I don't find Dana handsome, but this beefy dude, this guy that's kind of like the embodiment of what he's promoting. I mean, he even was going to have a boxing match with Tito way back in the day in 2007.
Well, I that's one thing. And I don't think you have to imitate Dana, but there's other guys that have been successful. Vince McMahon's not the same, even though he took a lot of steroids and built himself up and wrestled, but he was not presenting like I am like, I'm like you guys and just walked off the street and made it big. And, you can project yourself. I mean, he was more, but I am the, Vince McMahon's image was I am the bad, evil boss, and you can all fantasize a life that you get to control everything like I do. And then there's Don King, who's tremendously successful because he was just so over the top. There's just certain people have charisma, and certain people know how to use it and are, within their skin. And other guys, they just don't seem, it seems alien. And one problem Dom Davis is, again, you look at that article, he makes it clear he got into MMA only because he saw the sales, the sale price of the UFC. Well, right there, you're not a real fan, and you almost got to embrace that you're not a fan. You're a corporate guy, but that's not the guy. If you're not a fan, that's not the guy that should be selling it to the fans.
Yeah.
It doesn't. Him being on entrepreneur.com probably works because he's selling to a type of person that he can actually talk to. And he has the pitch down, but sometimes the problem is he then goes on Ariel and he repeats the same stuff. And it's like, well, now this is not the people for that message. They don't want to hear that you just started watching MMA after the sale of the UFC and you saw the price.
Right. All right. I have another question here real quick before we move on. Matt the Immortal Brown made a tweet today, and he said, he posted a picture of a castle in Scotland that he had visited. And he said it was so cool because they had filmed a lot of Braveheart there. And the last thing he put on the tweet was, when are we going to start having fights at places like this? So my question to you is, does PFL, any of the other organizations that are left, even the smaller ones, LFA, Cage Warriors, whatever, do they need a gimmick like that to break onto the scene, basically, to even get in there, get their foot in the door? I mean, UFC, you said it yourself, 800-pound gorilla in the room. They're taking up all the breathing room. So do other promotions need a gimmick?
Well, I mean, M1 Global did a couple shows out in like old medieval ruins. Remember those?
Yeah, out in
it looked amazing. And I do think we've talked about in the past that it would be smart to sometimes do shows in like scenic locations, but the fighters are still going to be key. I think it's genius that Turkey Al-Sheikh is going to put on Ryan Garcia, Devin Haney, Teofimo Lopez in Times Square. Right. Picture, it's just like, it's out of like a video game. It's just it's a scenic location, very memorable, but it doesn't work if you just have nobody's there. He has big name boxers showing up. He's going to do Alcatraz. That's genius. The talk of always doing it in the Coliseum, genius. But people aren't going to tune in just because it's at the Coliseum. No one's done that yet, but at the other locations, if you put a ringer at the bottom of the Eiffel Tower, it'll look great. And it looked great at the Olympics when they had events there, but no one's going to care. You need the fighters. It's something that adds additional interest in the fighters, especially if you have fighters that are TV products that can draw a TV audience, but maybe can't sell the tickets that some fighters can. And that's a problem sometimes you run into, where the guys, there's interest in them, they can draw an audience on TV, at least partial, but they're not the type of people that draw major tickets, often because they don't have a location to go to that's their own, where they have a local fan base. That would be perfect to put them in places where people are like, oh, that's, I find this intriguing. These guys are going to be on a battleship, whatever silly goddamn thing you want to do. But the key is not the location. The location just brings it to another level. The key is you got to have the fighters. All
right. Now, let's move on here, because there is a lot of debate right now about how successful the UFC is because they fill seats. But we happen to know their trickery, their sorcery. So could you lay out how they've perfected the art of ticket sales?
Well, it's not sorcery. They are successful at selling tickets. It's the debate on Twitter, social media, is that on one hand, people are like, the UFC is not as popular. People are losing interest in their end. All their ticket sales are through the roof. They're doing it right. And it's kind of both. And I think what people are missing is they have perfected ticket sales, but the fact that they're doing record gates does not mean the interest is there as much. It's hard to tell if there is. Interest might be there. Typically, when ticket sales are through the roof, that means there's high interest. But we've noticed in the last few years, and that is the market, the economy, our sales and stuff have been driven by the top of the economy more. We talked about this last week or the week before, that the top 10% are driving sales, the economy in the U.S. They buy more because assets have gone up so much since the pandemic that they can, they have all this extra wealth that they can cash in and spend on stuff and not feel concerned about it. And so what TKO does and the UFC does is specifically something very smart. They'll take an event, they'll put a limited amount of seats on sale. Often they'll give it to a broker somehow. There's very rules about this, so they get around them, but they'll put a section of tickets on sale for a super high amount of money. And so it's a limited release of tickets available in each section for the maximum price they think you can get for that location. People that want tickets will tune in, will check it out and say, oh, there's very few tickets available at this, and they're at this massive price. If I want to go, I got to pay, and they'll buy the tickets for that amount. Now, the tickets that aren't sold, they know, well, people can't afford that, so then they'll take them off the market again and put another batch of tickets on another location at a slightly lower price, and then the next group will come in. And the whole point is they're trying to sell tickets at the maximum amount that people will pay. Now, that doesn't mean, if you had a good example in many ways is you go back to Ali versus Frazier, the first one, they were selling Madison Square Garden. They could have sold that for a lot more money, but they thought it'd be offensive to people at the time, so they capped the ticket price. And so because the tickets were lower, a lot more people tried to buy tickets. And so the interest in an event, if you sold them for less, a smaller price, and you can see this in UK where they kind of unload them all at once, you might see the whole thing get sold out in a matter of minutes of 60 or 80,000 seats sold at these big events. That shows high demand. But it's harder to judge that with UFC because they were releasing them section by section at the maximum amount. And so we can't tell if there's a huge demand to buy the tickets. Like the previous example, like tens of thousands of people are lining up to get it. But we do know that the tickets they're selling out on are the maximum price that the market will bear. And so they're selling every ticket for the maximum amount. Should note, though, they're basically selling out. So it does say that amount they're paying for, there is a big enough audience that wants to go live no matter what, that will fill up the stadium. And so, but how much, how big is that demand? Is it massive? I mean, I don't know if it's as big as it used to be, but it's still big enough that they can sell out events. But the gate they're making, I don't think is quite as indicative of what the appeal of the product is. The gate they're making is how good they are at targeting the ticket sales to the people with the most money.
And we saw that pretty well at UFC 306, right?
Well, the Sphere Show?
Yeah, that's the one where they were doing the swap.
That's the one I think they released. And people remember that did a massive gate, and it took forever to sell out that. I don't even know if they officially sold out, but it got close to sell it. So they sold most of the tickets, did a massive gate. But the whole thing is they started with these huge ticket prices, sold what they could, pulled the tickets off, put them back on at slightly lower. And so that people were like, oh, the ticket prices keep going down. It shows how there's no demand. Well, there's no demand. There's less demand at that price, but it also showed how good they were to making sure that whatever price you were willing to pay, you would pay the most. They were trying to make sure whoever's going to buy a ticket was paying the most for their ticket.
All right. Now, you also have a theory about rites of passage in the UFC. Could you explain that?
Well, it's somewhat of a theory, but I think there's some evidence to this, is that the UFC, as they've moved more right wing, as they, we look at, there was poll surveys done of UFC fans, and people might not believe this, but UFC fans were basically evenly split between Democrats and Republicans 10 years ago, roughly, right? And now you see the shows and you see the fans going nuts for, conservative right wing figures. And so I think what it tells you is that because they become so aligned with the Republican Party, and because they're pushing for these ticket sales at a higher price, what you're seeing is for many people that align on the partisan side with the UFC aligns, I wouldn't say it's maybe a rite of passage as much as a pilgrimage, that a sign of what tribe you belong to. You have to go and see a UFC event. And so they are willing to pay more because they have to show up to these UFC events at least once in their life to show what side they're on. And I think that helps as well. Because these people, they see their heroes, they see the celebrities that they like there. They want to be part of that so they can boast that they were at a UFC event. We've always had that, though. People wanted to be seen at a UFC event and so they can claim they went. We still have that. But I think you see more of it from a Republican side. And I should say, too, we used to have at almost every UFC pay-per-view, there was a select group of very rich people that would show up at the UFC events and buy the bottom rows. I don't know if those same people go to the UFC events. I think that tribe has moved on. But I think the same thing has happened, is that a new group of people with money, that this is the thing to do. You should go to a UFC event, be seen with Kid Rock and Donald Trump and boo, if you're in Canada, boo Trudeau, although I do not think that would fly over as well anymore, considering the spat we're having in Canada. But again, it's become, if not Donald Trump, those guys, all the influencer and podcasters that show up to these events now, that's, you have to go to one of these events. It's a rite of passage, you could say, a pilgrimage, whatever. It's something to show which group you're part of.
What do you think about Kash Patel showing up at this last event, UFC 313, and he puts out a tweet and he says, "Nothing like being back home in Vegas, especially when you get to go to fight night." Do you think that sort of fits in with your pilgrimage, rite of passage, whatever? And also,
well, I think, sorry to finish your question.
No, I was just going to point out another one was Theo Vaughn. He posted, or someone actually posted a little video clip of him being at the arena this past Saturday before any fight had started, and when they show him in the clip, he's sitting all by himself, cage side, and there's a whole section behind him with not a soul in the seats.
I mean, he's a fan. I think people made a big deal when Donald Trump got elected about how Dana White and the UFC used the podcasters to help Dana White get, not Dana White, but Donald Trump get elected. But they missed how the relationship the UFC has nurtured with influencers and podcasters. And that recent article they about I think was it Forbes or whatever that had about the slap time club they spent very little on advertising. Their marketing budget's $25,000 per show, but they get 80, 100, whatever influencers to show up, and that's free. Millions of dollars of free advertising. And so yeah, I'm not surprised about Theo Vaughn being there. They get a bunch of influencers. Some of them we can't stand, like Andrew Tate showing up and people bringing them. But it's a ton of free marketing, and they also, because people are fans of them, their fans want to show up because they're going to be there. It gives the seal of approval. Now with Kash Patel, the head of the FBI, I think it's also symbolic of that the relationship the UFC has with Donald Trump. And this is a sign that I am part of the inner circle. I'm coming to the UFC. There's also the weird fact that he wants to live in Vegas instead of DC. Weird fact that his girlfriend, I use in air quotes here, lives in Ohio, and he is living with some other guy in Las Vegas. No aspersions being cast. I'm just pointing out some possible hypocrisy here on the conservative side. But so he wanted to show up, I think, to show that, hey, this is the place important members of the Trump administration have been seen at in previous events. I'm important. I'm here. And again, that it creates this image that other people that are on that side politically feel, like, oh, this is the thing, the place to be seen, the place to go when you're that I'm willing to go to events, and it drives up ticket prices for them in that direction. I'm trying to, there's got to be, I'm sure there's a liberal, equivalent. I mean, I would say Taylor Swift, but she actually appeals across the board. Maybe Beyonce shows or something. I don't know, but there is I'm sure there's a leftist liberal equivalent of Bernie Sanders rallies people used to drive to. That would be one, but people aren't paying for those. So,
all right. So This is the point where I'm going to encourage everyone to subscribe because we are heading into bonus territory. So if you're not a subscriber, you don't get to listen past this point. I would encourage you. Thank you. To access the bonus content of this episode, you must be a paid subscriber. To do that, go to heynottheface.substack.com and subscribe today.
Ow! Ow! Not the face! Ooh! Ooh! Okay, the face!